by fans, for fans, the Hog Style. And now, here's your host, Sean Conti.
Welcome to the Hog Style. It's officially the off-season, and it's going to be a bumpy one. Sean here, back with you tonight. I got Alexis and Steve Thomas with me as usual, but more importantly, we have longtime friend of the show and widely respected Washington Post correspondent Mark Bullock with us on the line. Mark, welcome back as usual, man. And I guess we last saw you, was it preseason time?
Yeah, just I think before the start of the season when we did that horrible schedule guessing thing, which I hope you guys don't bring up at all.
No, I have them written down. I have.
God, I looked at that a few weeks ago and I just cringed. I could not have done worse.
We've actually been talking about that.
You know, if you get the average close, you're doing good. Getting the individual games is impossible. We all know
I think we were all over the place. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think anybody did very well on that.
Well, I have the responses on this little sticky note
All right.
right here, so we'll get.
Oh, God, we're actually going to go through that? Are we doing that?
I'm gonna read. Darn right we are. If we have Mark on the line, we're good. We're gonna go through each response.
Dear Lord.
All right.
All right. Well, yeah, let's get into it. So we had what are we starting with today? I think we're starting with the poll, right?
Yeah.
Before we get into position groups. Obviously, I guess to tell people, we're going to do a poll. We're going to do some position groups, and we've also got to do this wild card preview that we said we were going to do. But let's start with that poll because I understand we got some good responses to it, did we not?
Yeah, we did. We got good responses. We need with an assist to Brian Mitchell and an assist to Scott Jackson, who helped us out with this. So thanks to those guys, we got really good responses.
Yes.
So the question of the day here is, what is your ideal but realistic outcome for 2018 for the Redskins quarterback dilemma? That was the question, and your choices are...
Doozy of a question.
Yeah, it is, and we really needed like 6 or 7 choices, but Twitter limits us to 4, so here they are. Long-term deal with Cousins, veteran free agent, draft Lamar Jackson, or draft Baker Mayfield. And I, of course, as always said, if you have another option, put it in comments, and I got pages and pages and pages of comments telling us why we were wrong, as usual. So
yeah,
let's start this off. So let's let Mark go second since he's not familiar with this poll thing. So Alex, let's start with you. Tell us what you think the public would have voted for here and what your choice was for the poll.
All right. So I don't know what the public went for. I'm going to just wildcard and say they said Baker Mayfield just because the timing of this poll, and I think it was right after the Oklahoma game.
It was one day after the Oklahoma game.
Right. So he kind of lit it up. The public was kind of Baker Mayfield crazy. My personal solution, and I actually have a very detailed, I've broken it down about 6 different ways in my head. Where I'm at right now is I would actually put the transition tag on Cousins, try and get him for one more year, and I would draft somebody in the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe even wait till the 4th round to get Falk out of Washington State, somebody like that. Someone who you can groom, then when Cousins leaves in a year, you have that rookie step in. But
all that stuff's wonderful,
yeah.
But you didn't actually give a choice that conformed with the poll.
You said Baker Mayfield was the choice, right?
Is that what I thought?
I said that at the very beginning, yeah.
I thought that was your public prediction. Okay, so
that is my public prediction. My personal prediction is not in the poll because it's too
your
narrow.
Personal question's all over the map. Yeah. All right, Sean,
run me through the options again one more time because I know they were vague. But just again.
Yeah, the options are again we're limited by Twitter. Sorry guys, but the options are do a long-term deal with Cousins, sign a veteran free agent. Draft Lamar Jackson, draft Baker Mayfield. And the reason, just before anybody cries out about this, the reason I didn't include guys like Josh Rosen is there's no chance Redskins can possibly draft him, because it's going to be too high. So I'm talking realistic options here.
I don't even know where I stand on this, let alone where the public is going to stand on this. But I think...
You guys are a big help with this poll.
It's tough. I mean, it's tough. Every year this goes on, it gets harder to... I don't know. I'm going to say probably one of the 2 drafts, but I really have no opinion on what the public's going to say between. No idea.
All right. Well, let's get an actual educated opinion on this.
Yes,
Mark,
please.
This is your first time running through one of our dumb polls with us. What do you think about the poll?
I mean, your description as a dumb poll, I'll leave it as that. No, I think the public would probably go for Baker Mayfield. I personally would, can I choose two of the options? Can I say
you can do whatever you want?
I did whatever I want. You can do what you want.
I would say get a veteran guy and draft either Mayfield or Jackson.
That's a smart move.
I think you can find ways that either one fits in with Gruden. I would imagine Mayfield probably, his attacking mentality would kind of fit in with Gruden a little bit more than Lamar Jackson. But Jackson probably is a little bit more ready to fit into more of Gruden's offense. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't have to transition it quite so much. You wouldn't have to turn it into you wouldn't have to take plays out of the playbook as much for Lamar Jackson as you would for Baker Mayfield. But I think Baker Mayfield's is his mentality of wanting to hit home run balls basically every time. It kind of matches up with something Jay Gruden would like. So okay. I think draft that guy, whichever one that they prefer, and get a veteran that you don't have to start him week one if you don't want him.
Okay, well, fair enough. And I should put out there that I did explain to the public in this poll that the idea with the signed veteran free agent was for that veteran free agent to be the permanent solution, meaning that's the guy, not necessarily just a placeholder. That was sort of the intent.
See, that's the problem. I don't know if there are any vets like that outside of Kirk right now. You know.
Yeah, possibly not. But regardless, by a vote of, and again, we got a lot of votes on this, so this made the rounds. By a vote of 56%, the public went with long-term deal with Cousins. Believe it or not.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I'm not really all that surprised, honestly.
Yeah, none of them would have surprised me.
I'm a little surprised because since it's coming off the heels of the Giants game, it was such a disaster, and we're going to get into that with Mark. But that was what the public voted for. And
nobody wants to go back to total uncertainty. Sorry, I know I'm not trying to interrupt, but that's why nobody wants to go back to complete uncertainty at quarterback. At least you have some kind of Kirk. That's what it is.
And Mark got it right in terms of the draft choices. 22% said draft Baker Mayfield. 13% went with the veteran free agent, and the bulk of those, I'll just tell you, are Colt McCoy fans with the veteran free agent. That's what those guys mean by veteran free agent. And then 9% was draft Lamar Jackson. So that was a result of the poll. Personally, I would have voted for the Cousins thing. But let's move on, because, again, it's a dumb poll, and we have a guest here. There's better things to do than change our polls.
Well, we're very self-deprecating with our polls on this show all of a sudden.
Well,
you guys don't know how hard it is to come up with good polls week after week after week.
You forget to ask us for ideas, though. That doesn't help.
Well, because recently I've just been tossing them out randomly whenever I think about them.
Sure.
This makes Mark winner, though. From now on. Mark will help us with polls from now on, right, Mark?
Sure.
He's like, yeah, definitely. All right, you gonna give us what? Are you gonna give us comments or something, Steve, or?
No, let's just skip the comments because I got too many of them, and let's move on to something more interesting with Mark here.
Okay, right. So what are we doing now then? Are we revisiting our season predictions? Because we've got Mark.
Oh, let's do that real fast. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I have that answer too.
Yeah.
And
hear that?
This is just torture Mark in the beginning of the show. That's what we're doing.
He's never going to come back to talk to us ever again.
We're trying to get it out of the way, Mark. Really, I'm looking out for you, man.
Sure.
For those
it's a Band-Aid.
For those of you who don't recall, on the last time Mark was here several months ago, we asked him to participate in our dumb season predictions, and he did that and then immediately regretted his predictions and disavowed his predictions entirely. So we'll run through the results here. Sean predicted a 6-10 record. Alex predicted 8-8.
Yeah.
And he was the closest in the winner. Both me and Mark predicted 9-7, which was fairly close. And then Jamal was way out of touch, as was Sean. Jamal predicted 10-6. So Alex,
I like how you say Sean was way out of touch when he was one off.
I'm exactly the same amount off, and
okay,
Alex,
you're right. You're right.
You got to be close without going over, man. That's the rule. So I win again.
Yeah, but you were too negative, though. Alex's prediction was better. You were too negative.
I concede.
I declare Alex the winner.
Yes,
I concede that.
Winner by default. I'll take it.
The point here is that Mark wasn't too far off, and he had nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, if you go game by game, though, you see that basically every game I predicted it wrong.
We're not going to go through all that. Yeah, we're all totally wrong.
Yeah. I think I went through and counted mine, and I'm like 2 for 14 or something ridiculous like that. It's never good.
Yeah,
you
I
get hit by game.
think my predictions were exactly opposite of what actually happened.
You know what, guys? I've been keeping this in the chamber for a while, but y'all made fun of me when I said we were gonna lose that Minnesota game. All of you predicted that as a win, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
For you.
Yeah, you're right.
Sweet revenge. That's the whole reason I do this
Apparently you had some inside info on Case Keenum that we didn't.
Yeah, I sure did. He's my guy. Okay, so that's fair enough. Nobody was really, wildly off, I guess. Did we
Let's
do?
move
We
on
didn't.
to
Yeah, we didn't predict postseason or anything like that.
No,
so we
no.
just
How
predicted
would we
straight
predict
games,
that?
so. I'll just predicting whether or not we'd make it. I think.
Oh no.
I think our records spoke for themselves.
Right.
True. Fair enough.
Let's move on to something that Mark has expertise in.
Yeah, so this is killing me. So I understand we want to do this position group breakdown situation. Do we still want to do that? Because this is going to kill me doing this. This is horrible. I don't want to go through this.
We have to, though.
Yeah, that's why we're here, Sean. That's why we're
here.
here.
This is the Hogstye season in review.
I know, but this is so rough. There's so many problems, and I see the wormholes already that are going to form. But let's do it.
Let's just start with quarterback. Get the big picture out of the way here.
It's the natural place.
Mark, give us an overview of what you saw with Kirk Cousins this year, how he performed, and where, if you want to delve into this, where the Redskins will go from here.
Well, I think everyone is kind of guessing where the Redskins will go from here. So that's something that I couldn't provide any sort of insight on. Cousins, it was an interesting year. He started off rough, but he tends to start off rough, and then he sort of by mid-season hit his sort of typical hot spell, which is what he's done the last 2 years, and then he kind of fell away at the end. So there's kind of a trend over the last 3 seasons where he kind of starts poorly, ends poorly, and has a decent middle.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard to say he was amazing. It was like how Jay Gruden said at the end of the year. I mean, it's hard to say he played amazing when they only finished 7-9. So, yeah, it's hard to say he played amazing. I'd agree with that comment. What I would say is there was definite signs of progression from him in terms of his process, as he likes to call it, where he was definitely a lot more willing to take shots downfield, which in years gone by, we've seen him just not take those shots even when they're there. And he had Deshaun Jackson the past 2 years, and God knows how many times he either missed him or didn't take the shot. Whereas this year we saw, I don't know whether it's just because he had more confidence in Doxson going up and getting a ball and making him right on a throw, or what have you, but sort of after about week 5 or 6 onwards, we saw a pretty drastic improvement of his willingness to stay with those routes down the field. And if he had to buy a bit of extra time by moving around in the pocket or scrambling, and then going to those routes down the field. So that's a definite plus. What I would say to that as sort of an asterisk is, although he was more willing to go down the field and he was better at staying with those down the field routes and taking more shots, his ball placement on some of those throws were pretty terrible.
Yeah,
there's giving the receiver a chance and for an opportunity ball, when there's throwing it where the receiver can't really get to it or out of bounds. And
Steve counts those. I want to know how many total we had all year. Steve counts those every game.
Like total yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I do, but I didn't keep up with them for the whole season. At large. So, Mark, you brought up those 50-50 balls. My kind of working theory on those is some of those deep 50-50 balls to Doxson, I think, are only the 50-50 balls because the pass is bad. And if I think some of those, if Kirk had led Doxson a little bit more, it wouldn't have had to be such a defended pass. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're right. And that's why I kind of hesitate to say the term 50-50 ball, because when the ball placement of them made them more sort of 30-70 in the favor of the defense, and Doxson really had to make a real good effort to either get to the ball and sometimes just break up what would have been an interception. So that's why I'm kind of putting an asterisk by the sort of development of being willing to go down the field more often. He's definitely more willing to do it than in years gone by, which is definitely a sign of progress. But there's a difference between willingness to do it and ability to do it.
Right.
It's like exactly. It's like a running back, a young running back can be willing to pass protect, but there's an ability to pass protect. Otherwise, he's going to get his quarterback hit. It's the exact same thing. So, he's got to improve.
This is you touched on this basically, but I guess the question that I wanted to ask about him is just, do you learn anything from this year that we didn't already know about Kirk? I guess you've touched on the fact that he seems more willing to throw those balls, but did you learn anything that's going to help us pilot through this offseason and make a decision here coming up? I mean, is there anything new to be learned about Kirk? Or, I mean, at this point, it's all out there.
He is who he is.
Yeah, there's certainly an argument for saying he is who he is. I think, as I talked about, the trend of how he starts and finishes poorly, but he plays well during the sort of middle of the season. That's a pretty recognizable trend over 3 years. And he's still prone to these bad interceptions and these bad decisions every now and again. I would say his process has gotten better for the most part this year, where he's making the right reads and the right decisions. It's just the throws themselves aren't necessarily the best throws. So I'd say that he is still progressing. I'd say he is getting better, and from standpoint of, he didn't have Deshaun Jackson, and he didn't have Pierre Garçon or Jordan Reed for most of the year, or Chris Thompson for the last 6 games. He still did pretty well overall, but is pretty good what you want to your quarterback of the future, or is it time to sort of move on? I mean, the Bengals kind of had the same thing to say. Well, we've got pretty good in Andy Dalton, and there's tons of teams around the league where they've got these pretty good quarterbacks, but are they really good? Are they ready to make that next step, or are they just kind of sit where they are? And that's kind of where I'm at with Cousins. Is I think he's not. I don't think he's ever going to get to that very, very good status.
You kind of brought this up just now, and it begs the question to me. Thompson goes out in the Saints game. How much of a difference do you see in Kirk's gameplay and in the overall offensive strategy after Thompson goes down?
It certainly hurt them because Chris Thompson, it wasn't just his ability as a receiver when he got the ball in his hands. It was, what game was it? I think it was the Seahawks game where they hit a dig route to Jamison Crowder over the middle. And the reason they were able to hit that dig route to Jamison Crowder over the middle was Thompson ran a little hook route underneath, and he got 3 linebackers to all go, oh God, there's Chris Thompson. We've got to go get him. So they all jumped up to Thompson underneath, and that left a huge gap between the safety and the linebackers. And that's where Crowder was able to work. So that losing that threat that opens up other things for the rest of the offense, as well as, on screens, he's ridiculous, and he's a very good pass protector. And they obviously missed out on him in pass protection. I think that was an underrated part of his injury, was they really missed out on him in pass protection. So they were often having to throw shorter, quicker routes and go sort of 5-man quick game stuff rather than 6-man protections where they could trust Thompson to pick up a blitzer and that kind of thing. So yeah, his injury certainly did hurt Kirk and the offense from a schematic standpoint. Yeah.
First of all, I think the Kirk Cousins question is really more of a cost versus benefit issue more than anything else. We're going to put it in financial terms. Because Kirk has the strengths. We could be the Denver Broncos and playing Paxton Lynch and Brock Osweiler. We could be right back there with those guys. Or, the Cardinals with Stanton, for God's sakes.
That's what I'm saying with the uncertainty. Exactly. It's cost-benefit.
Yeah, I mean, decision. So the real question is, is he worth $28 million? He's worth something. keep in for several years, but is it $28 million worth? Which of course is the multi-million-dollar question. To me, and Mark, tell me if I'm wrong here, but to me, this is kind of the summary of Kirk Cousins. He has outstanding stats. His stats are inflated a little bit despite his naturally conservative play style, where he is not typically going to take a lot of chances and not typically going to force the balls into small windows. But he's great in that short and mid range. He's a little shaky on the deep balls. Generally speaking, he's a quality quarterback, but I don't think he can carry a team without a lot of quality pieces around him, and that's what we saw this year. Is that kind of fair as a 30-second summary?
Yeah, that's relatively fair. I'd say, as I said, he's progressed in trying to take those deep shots, which is one of the clear signs of progression from him this year. But as we talked about, he's not hitting them, so that would be the next step. But yeah, he's a good quarterback that can, when he's hot, he can be very, very good. But when he's hot, tends to be sort of maybe a 4 or 5 week spell from sort of week 8 or 9 to sort of week 13, 14, and then after that, when it gets sort of clutch time, it doesn't tend to happen for him.
I saw you put out a breakdown about that first interception against the Giants early in the game. It just mind-boggling to me that he didn't see the linebacker literally standing right there.
The first or the third interception?
I thought it was the first one.
The first one, he had a free rusher off the edge, and it was a pretty good scheme by the Giants. They showed a linebacker blitzing, and then he dropped off in a nickel corner blitzed, I think.
And I'm talking about the third one then.
Yeah, the third one was where there was a crossing route. I think it was Brian Quick possibly on a crossing route, and he tried to hit Brian Quick on the crossing route despite the linebacker being in his pocket, basically, and jumping it before Kirk even threw it. That one was an absolutely terrible throw. Yeah. And he said he was trying to force the issue, but there's forcing the issue, and then there's just making a reckless decision, and that was a reckless decision.
So, I mean, kind of in summary, that's what we've seen with Kirk Cousins. It's more of the same. He's progressed somewhat, but Kirk will Kirk, I think is, best way to put it.
Yeah, so at this point.
Do we want to move on?
Yeah,
I think so.
I think we should move on to some other spots.
Let's talk about running backs, maybe, because we already touched on a couple, perhaps, and how the injuries impacted that position group.
Well, we only have 10 different running backs we could talk about.
Yeah.
Well, listen, true. I've been bashing Samaje Perine for, 3 months now?
Yeah, since we drafted him.
On an every single week basis. Mark, Samaje Perine. Yeah. Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't think he's a very capable back. I think he's average at best. What are you seeing in Samaje Perine's play?
Yeah, the start of the season, sort of towards halfway, I would have 100% agreed with you. He was running tentatively. He wasn't breaking any tackles. He was making wrong decisions, and he was getting tripped up by tackles that shouldn't be tripping up a guy of his size. And those were happening behind the line of scrimmage. So, yes, I would have agreed with you. It took him a while to get his feet set. I think once he sort of... there was... I can't remember which game it was, sort of mid-season. It was after Rob Kelly got injured, and he was kind of the guy that they said he was going to... Gruden said he was going to be the guy, and Gruden challenged him to have better contact balance and to run more decisively. And the week after that, I think he had his first 100-yard game of the season. And we saw exactly what Gruden asked of him, which was better contact balance, more decisiveness. With a running back, it's not necessarily always being able to see the right hole. It's being able to make your decision and stick to your decision and be decisive with going through with the path that you're taking, because you won't always see the wide open rushing lane, if the cutback lane, or you wouldn't always see that you could have bounced outside. But if you go with your decision and you stick with it and you run decisively, then you can create yards yourself. You can run through tackles, especially at his size. He's a guy that can run through tackles, and he should be able to run through tackles. And we saw him run with better pad level, lower his shoulders, run over his feet, and keep himself sort of a lower center of gravity, so that he was able to run through contact a little bit better, and that saw him a lot more productive.
But all that's great, Mark. But he never ever averaged even 4 yards a carry.
Yes, but when you consider the injuries they've had on the offensive line, they had 26 different offensive line combinations. The tight ends hardly block for him. The wide receivers aren't the best blockers in the world, and they're still trying to run 7 or 8 different run schemes. It's not particularly easy. They didn't make it easy on him. That being said, do I think he's a guy that if tomorrow was the draft and Saquon Barkley was sat there at 13, I don't think you would pass up that opportunity. I think he's the kind of guy where he's almost, well, maybe not Kirk Cousins, but he's kind of a guy where you can say we could do better, but we can sit with this guy if other opportunities arise elsewhere, where maybe we need to take care of receiver, or maybe we need to take care of the defense first. We can kind of stick with Pirine and go with him for the next season. But if a guy like Barkley were to be there and you can get a clear upgrade, then you can do it.
I'll tell you what I've noticed.
Sorry.
I
just wanted to correct Steve because he rushed twice for 9 yards against Seattle for an average of 4.5 yards a carry.
Okay, yeah.
So,
laugh it up.
Gotta be right, man. Sorry.
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, the thing I'm noticing more and more about Gruden's offense in general is it just seems to naturally favor the guys like Thompson, and we're seeing it now with the kid from Colorado and like these natural, more small, speedy guys seem to just do better in this offense. Should they embrace that, you think, going forward?
I think the thing is, Gruden is kind of torn. He likes those guys as third down backs, and obviously Gruden's a passing guy. We all know that. Right. And having the back as the fifth eligible receiver is a huge benefit. And it gives them so much more versatility to have a back that can be a reliable receiver. So he definitely likes those guys, and they definitely help the offense run better. And when they run quick game and no huddle, and they go spread and all of that kind of stuff, having that type of back is great. With Gruden's run game, it varies. You can say, yes, you like those little shifty guys on those little inside gap plays where they can sort of press the hole and bounce one run outside and cut away from defense and run away from them. But at the same time, that's not necessarily the design of the play. The design of the play is to go up the middle and try to find the gap up the middle. And obviously that hole might not necessarily be there, and the better option might be to bounce outside. But those littler sort of scat backs that are quicker and faster and not necessarily more powerful don't tend to hold up particularly well when running between the tackles on those power schemes. If they stuck to something like a zone scheme, if they just went, we'll just stick to a zone scheme, we'll do Mike Shanahan, we'll run outside zone 10-15 times a game, we'll run inside zone 5 to 10 times a game, then you could probably run one of those guys, because for the most part you're running to the edge through the outside zone, or you're making one cut and you're getting up the field.
Sure.
Those would be fine, but Gruden likes to run all these power schemes and the gap schemes and stuff, which is perfectly fine. Obviously, it's his prerogative to do that, but you typically need those bigger backs to be able to take the wear and tear of running up the middle between the tackles and taking all the hits.
See, I've always maintained that. I think Gruden would run a lot more of those power schemes if he had a back that could do it. I think he's smart enough to realize that, he doesn't have the world's greatest power backs on the roster. I think Rob Kelly's probably the best of the bunch, but, he's by no means elite. I think if Leonard Fournette fell into his hands, for example, we'd see a different run game. I think he's smart enough to adjust to the personnel he has.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, I go back and forth with the run game. I like the idea of being able to run the various different schemes because it gives you the versatility to match up to your opponent. If you look at the Saints, they basically have all the different components of the run game the same way the Redskins do. They can run power, they can run zone, they can run the little inside gap duo plays and what have you. And they can run everything very, very well because their offensive line is has been playing together for a little while now, and obviously they've got Mark Ingram to run the power stuff, and they've got Alvin Kamara to run to the edge. So they've got the backs to do it. They've got an offensive line to do it, and they run all the different things, and that makes them fantastic against whichever defense. Because if they get a defense that is particularly good against zone, well, we'll just run power all day. If you're a small, speedy defense, we're going to run it up the middle and bulldoze over you. Or if you're a big, lumbering defense, then we'll run to the edge and run by you. So that's the benefit of it. But the flip side of that is that they tend to it's harder to master one technique. You kind of become a jack of all trades and master of none, and that's why Shanahan was always such a very good running team, is because he stuck to inside zone, outside zone, and it was very basic. But when you run it constantly and it's your only real run scheme, then you become very, very good at it, and you get used to, you just naturally learn what the guy next to you can pick up and what he can't pick up. And from an offensive line perspective, they're stunting this guy in, well, I know I have to pick him up, and my right tackle will go up and pick up the linebacker instead, and what have you. So you get used to all the different stunts that they can run against you, and you get used to all the different fronts that teams will try to show, and you master it.
You got to go all in for your scheme.
Exactly. So
I like that.
It's the two different sides of the coin, and they both have benefits, but it's just a way they view it. And Gruden's, I mean, Gruden, I think when he first was appointed the Redskins head coach, when he was first hired, I think he said there isn't a play that he's seen drawn up that he doesn't like. So he kind of wants everything in his playbook. He's a little bit greedy in that manner. But,
sure.
I think they could probably benefit by trying to stick and master one scheme.
Real quick before we move on to another position group, I liked personally what I saw from Capri Bibbs. I thought he was a little bit more dynamic than the other running backs we have in his ability to accelerate, his ability to be a little bit elusive, and he was pretty good with his hands, obviously, out of the backfield. To me, it struck me as a guy who, at a very minimum, earned his shot to stick around next year. What'd you see in the Capri Bibbs?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. What was most impressive to me, and it was only one or two runs, but there was a duo play that he ran a couple weeks ago. I think it might have been against the Broncos. And most backs the Redskins have had when they've run duo have duo, for people who might not know, it's a double team block where a guard and a center will take a double team and they'll block a defensive tackle up to a linebacker, and the other guard and a tackle will take the other defensive tackle and block them up to the linebacker. And the running back's job is to read the middle linebacker or the Mike linebacker, and however the Mike linebacker fills on the run, the running back will cut the other way. So what most Redskins running backs have done is they've seen the Mike backer fill directly straight, and they've just instantly tried to bounce it outside. Whereas what we saw from Capri Bibbs was he was more willing to let the play develop. He had a bit more patience, and he pressed the hole a little bit, and that caused the backer to overextend to one side, and that opened up the lane. Cutback lane to cut back in behind and burst up the field, and I think he picked up something like 13 or 14 yards, which might not sound like an amazing play, but I think it was potentially, I haven't fully charted up every play so far yet, but I think it was potentially their longest run on duo for the whole season. So
beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's worth a spot.
If it's one of those things, if out of lack of other options, if for nothing else, but so I guess you got to temper your expectations. I think he's been with 2 other teams or something, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's like bounced around.
All right, well, so we probably can't do everything. Offensively, we have tight ends, receivers, offensive line still to cover. What do you guys want to do?
Let's do receivers.
Let's just say passing game in general.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right.
I think it begins and ends with Josh Doxson, and we talked about him a little bit already in conjunction with the quarterback discussion. But Doxson is a controversial guy in my eye because he's a first-round pick who, by virtue of his draft position, if nothing else, I think the team can reasonably expect him to be able to run all routes and be able to get the tough yardage, get separation, good hands, all that. And I'm not sure we're really seeing that from him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Doxson has the potential to be the guy they have as their number one receiver next year. I do agree that he's not necessarily performing on a consistent basis and consistently getting separation. He does run pretty good routes for the most part. There's a couple of routes where he can be a little bit lazy here and there, but for the most part, he runs pretty sharp routes. Particularly short and underneath stuff. He can cut pretty quickly and set up guys pretty quickly. And so I think he can be their number one guy going forward. I don't think they need to necessarily go and spend a load of money on a big name receiver or go and draft one with the 13th pick. I think he can be their number one guy going forward. He definitely does need to improve, but we need to remember this was effectively his rookie season, given that he missed most of his rookie year. And typically, receivers is one of the longer developing positions when you draft them. When you draft them, you have to be willing to stick with them over a number of years. And I think typically the trend is sort of by year 3, the penny sort of drops for them, and that's when they really start to produce. So I think that's where they stand with Doxson.
Hey, I know you said you don't think they need to draft anyone or sign a big name, but they probably need to add something to this receiving core, for next year.
Yeah.
What is there any particular weapon you think they're lacking? Do they need to go find another speed guy like Deshaun Jackson was, or do they need to find a better possession guy? What would your ideal new toy for this offense be, to lack a better term?
Yeah, sure. When they say they don't need to go and draft a number one or sign a number one, I think Josh Doxson can be the guy that is your number one receiver in the offense. But
but they still need a number 2 or something, right?
They still need something extra. Like Ryan Grant, as much as Jay Gruden loves him and he's a decent receiver, I don't think he should be anything more than your third or fourth receiver.
Sure.
So they could definitely use it as a number 2. And
to me, they need this. They need the stretch the field guy. That's what they need.
It depends how you view Doxson, because I'm still not 100% sure exactly how I feel about Doxson. He seems to, because he's a guy that you can win deep with,
right?
But he's also but he's not necessarily a burner running deep. He's not Deshaun Jackson, Kenny Stills, Brandon Cooks kind of guy that burns guys deep with just pure speed. But he's not a Pierre Garçon kind of tough.
That traditional number 1.
He's not the kind of possession guy that you'll go to on third and short.
Right.
So
if he's going to become that, though, then I think when you're talking about route combinations and play calling, you really need someone to do the 9 route or the out and up.
I agree,
and they don't have that.
Well, it depends on who they think Doxson is going to become. Whether they think he can become Garçon or whether they think he can become more of the Deshaun Jackson type guy that they're going to throw too deep. And I think a lot of that will depend on whether Kirk Cousins is back.
I think I compared Doxson earlier this year to Alvin Harper to a certain extent. As kind of a floor. At a minimum, he ought to, if he can progress, he really ought to be able to do the athletic downfield stuff. If he doesn't sort of become the all-encompassing number 1, at least.
So it depends on what progression path you think Doxson is on, or whether you think he's kind of going to be an in-between guy, and whether you try to get another kind of in-between guy to keep the offense balanced. Looking at the kind of receivers that are available in free agency, you see Sammy Watkins would make some sense, given he's played in Sean McVay's system in LA.
I like that one.
He played the X there, which is kind of what Doxson's played most of the year. But at the same time, Doxson has played Z at some times. So You could move Doxson to the Z, and Watkins could play the X as well. So I think that would give you some versatility, because both guys have the ability to go deep, and both guys have the kind of ability to win underneath as well. So that would kind of be a match kind of similar to Doxson guy. Otherwise, maybe you'd look at Allen Robinson in free agency, because he'd be a guy. He's a home run hitter, so that would be the other kind of guy you would look at. But I guess it would depend on who's available and what money you get them for.
Sure. I was just kind of curious where your thought was on that, because I'm kind of with Steve, where I want to get another deep ball guy to kind of open things up for Doxson underneath. But anyway, that was just something that's been kicking around the back of my head. Do we want to move on to some defense?
Why don't we? Yeah, because we got to squeeze in this preview here at the end too. So, How do you guys want to do defense? Do you want to do position group? You want to talk a little more generally, perhaps?
I think let's go general, because we need to have enough time for the
Sorry, I ramble on.
Yeah, no. We keep on asking follow-up questions. It's our fault too.
Yeah, you cut me off if I keep rambling.
Well, let's start with this, Mark. Edge rushers. I think Preston Smith had an up and down year. Ryan Kerrigan is always Ryan Kerrigan. I'd like to start with your thoughts on Junior Galette. I realize he's a free agent, but he was sort of the X factor, if you will, I think this year, certainly amongst the fan base because of his story, and he's kind of a likable guy. I thought he came on at the second half of the year and started getting some better pressure, despite the lack of high sack numbers. So, Galette, what'd you see?
Yeah, I'd agree. Well, I'd say he was pretty good from the start. He just wasn't getting the snaps.
Right.
The burst was still there. The ability to turn the corner and beat a guy for speed to the edge. The Redskins don't have that from anyone else. Kerrigan and Preston Smith are both very good pass rushers, and they win in different ways. And they both had very good seasons, I think. And I can see why those two are the main starters ahead of Preston Smith, but I would have ahead of Junior Galette. But I would have liked to have seen Galette get on the field more often as a third down pass rush specialist, and maybe kick Kerrigan or Smith inside, or you just find a way to rush all three guys. But I definitely agree. Galette gives them something they don't have, and his burst was still there. And he still generated plenty of pressure, and he forced the ball out a lot quicker than anyone else on the Redskins team has done. So 100% he was, despite not having the sack numbers, he still somewhat lived up to his reputation as being that kind of speed rusher. And he's someone I would definitely look to bring back, certainly over Trent Murphy. Trent Murphy had a really good year last year, but he's more of the same of Ryan Kerrigan, Preston Smith, in that he wins with hands and leverage, which is a perfectly legitimate way for a rusher to win. But they've already got two of those guys, and Junior Galette gives them an X factor that they don't have elsewhere.
I'd also mention we have Ryan Anderson, who's again more of a power, wins with leverage kind of edge guy. And frankly, I've heard some people say they think he should just put on weight and become a defensive end or something.
Well, let's talk about Ryan Anderson. He was the big,
there's not much to talk about. He didn't get many snaps.
Yeah.
Well, but what'd you see in Ryan Anderson? I was a little bit disappointed in him, frankly.
I saw what I saw from him in college, which was he's a very good run defender on the edge. Like the very few snaps that he did have. Was it against the Seahawks? He blew up a pulling guard.
Yeah, I think that was probably his heaviest used game. Something around there.
They, I don't know if it was the Seahawks. They're not typically a team that pulls a guard, but whatever. Anyway, it was some team pulled a guard, and he not only blew up the guard, but he blew up the tight end coming behind him, and and blew up that run completely, and turned a run that could have quite easily been a 4 or 5 yard gain into a negative play. So he is a very good run defender, especially on the edge. Pass rushing, I can't really say I remember any plays of him being particularly flashy on the edge.
No, I don't think he had a sack all year, did he?
No.
I don't think so.
And that's why I sort of theorized around the draft time when he was drafted. I wonder if he could kick inside to inside linebacker, where he could be a little bit more useful in the run.
Lord knows we could have used some inside linebackers, considering how many of them got hurt. Well, we got to talk about the other big draft pick, which is Jonathan Allen. We only saw him for 6 games before he went out. Your perspective on Jonathan Allen?
Really good. Lived up to expectations, despite not necessarily having the numbers off straight away. He was excellent against the run, and he provided a very good pass rush. Very good push up the middle. When we saw Kerrigan and Smith getting sacks at the start of the year, it was because him and Ioannidis were getting really good pressure up the middle, and the quarterbacks couldn't step up, and that's when Kerrigan in particular is particularly effective. But Preston Smith got in on that as well. So, Jonathan Allen lived up to expectations. Really sucked to see him get injured, and if he comes back healthy, he's going to be a cornerstone for the franchise going forward.
Nice. Well, that's a good thing. Let me ask you this, because I think it's the post-Joe Barry era. We were all really excited. I think more excited for the defense in the offseason before the season started. I think we were much higher on that. A little bit disappointing. I think where the offense is kind of ranked in the middle there, obviously the defense is ranked below that. What did you see? I mean, can you just speak generally when DJ Swearinger says things like, we obviously don't practice hard enough, or we're not doing a good enough job in practice? Do you see anything to that, just thinking generally?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if they didn't practice hard enough or what have you. I mean, obviously, I'm not there, and
right.
At the start of the season, they played pretty well when they had their main guys, when they had everyone healthy. They played
A-team.
Yeah, they played pretty well, and they looked pretty good, and particularly in the secondary, it was the best I've seen a Redskins secondary in God knows how long. They weren't just running pure zone coverages like they had in the past, and they weren't just running pure man. They were pattern matching very well. There was a lot of communication. Everyone was on the same page. They were passing off receivers, and just nobody was open. And early in the year, you could see guys like DJ Swearinger were just, and Kendall Fuller as well. They were just taking away routes. They were running routes for receivers, and they were just taking them away. And the quarterbacks had to go elsewhere. And then again, that's where the front guys got their pressure and their sacks, because they just didn't have anyone to throw to. So, yeah, it's hard to say when that
change
wrong.
happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, execution seemed like it just became such a big problem. And I'm just wondering if you saw general sloppiness, or is it just injuries, or, the perfect storm of everything? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's
maybe you can't answer. It's really hard. Who knows?
It is a hard thing to say. Especially with defenses, it's not as obvious when it's schematic things. Especially the type of defense they run, because they run. If you run just a pure zone, it's obvious to say this guy was out of position. Or if you run just pure man, you can say, well, this guy got beat. But when they run their sort of pattern matching stuff, it's hard to say. Well, sometimes it can be a communication issue. Like against the Vikings, they had who was it? Thielen on a 3rd and 12 or something like that. He ran a slant. They split him out wide. They had him in the slot. They split the running back out wide, and D'Angelo Hall and Zach Brown were talking to each other at the snap, and then the ball was snapped, and neither of them covered Thielen over the middle. He converted. So there's communication issues come into it, and what have you. So it was hard to say. And with that kind of defense, when you do get injuries, it's hard for the communication to stay at the high level that they had it at the start of the year, and that's when things can go desperately wrong.
Now I'm having Adam Thielen flashbacks. Great.
Well, yeah. Hey, Mark, you mentioned the A-team. Going into next year, real quick, assume most of the A-team comes back. What would you say the number one need is on defense going forward at that point?
That's a good one.
That is a good question. It's a hard one to answer, because the number one, the A-team probably played pretty damn well. It would be more depth guys. Because when you look at the way Monte Nicholson stepped in at free safety, and that freed up DJ Swearinger to play strong, and they both were very good at that. Kendall Fuller was excellent in nickel all year. Josh Norman and Rashad Breeland were generally very good.
Right. Now, Breland, they're pretty much saying it's not coming back, but we have other guys who can fill in.
That's not what they've said. They signed Dunbar and said that doesn't affect the Breland negotiations at all.
There's been a lot of rumors.
Yeah, the report out from, was it JP Finley, said that they're going to let Breland test the market, and they wouldn't necessarily. I think the implication of that is that they're not necessarily desperate to bring him back. But if he doesn't get the kind of offer that he's expecting on the market, then they might be more interested.
But you have a couple guys behind him who
absolutely.
Could
They've got a bit of depth at corner, so they're not too bad there. I thought Mason Foster and Zach Brown were outstanding when they were both healthy. The edge guys, Preston Smith and Ryan Kerrigan were great. Junior Gillette was good. And defensive line, Ioannidis and Allen, when you're talking about in a nickel front, they were really good. Maybe if you want a base end, to kick inside,
fill it out, kind of.
Someone like maybe another Jonathan Allen, as much as hard as that would be to get, but someone in that kind of mold that it could play end in the 3-4 base front and then kick inside to tackle in nickel fronts, and that would potentially be the biggest need. But at that point, I would say you'd need more depth guys than starters if you have everyone.
And of course, getting the big Jonathan Allen type is assuming we don't need a quarterback, which would instantly become the biggest need, of course.
Right. Yeah. That's why I asked just one broad defensive need.
I'd say depth if I can use that as an answer rather than necessarily.
That's fair. No, I'll take depth as the answer.
Yeah, not necessarily a 100% definite starter because their A-team starters are good when healthy.
Sure.
Depth.
Nice. All right, well, do you guys have anything else you want to add about defense or ask Mark, or shall we go over to a quick and dirty wild card preview?
I think we could talk about this stuff for hours if we wanted, but we probably ought to move on because we're reaching the end of the hour.
This is why I didn't want to do the position groups, because I'm looking at it and it's just a bottomless hole, Steve. It's an endless hole.
We have nothing but time. We've got nothing.
The wild card is also an endless hole, I feel like.
That's true. God, you are right about that. Okay, well, some interesting matchups indeed. What do you guys find to be perhaps the most intriguing of what's to come?
I think I would like to start with some of those AFC matchups. Steve has them all listed out, but the one that fascinates me is the fact that the Buffalo Bills made the playoffs.
Well,
so I want to start there.
Didn't they kind of get a technicality?
They backed in, which is really the best way to make the playoffs.
Look, let me simplify this game, okay? This is the biggest mismatch of the wild card weekend. Looking at my numbers and my rankings here, I think, honestly, believe it or not, Jacksonville is going to be a sleeper team. I think Jacksonville will do well.
I don't think they're a sleeper team. I think most
championships.
Yeah, I think they have a very complete team across the board. Buffalo, if you look at the things Buffalo's accomplished, the numbers Buffalo's put up, I think they and the Tennessee Titans are the two weakest teams in the playoffs. Yes. So I think Buffalo is going to have a short exit, courtesy of Jacksonville, Sunday afternoon for sure.
Say Mark, something in defense of Buffalo, Mark. Yeah.
I can't really defend Buffalo on that one. I kind of agree. The only thing that will stop the Jags from having a very good playoff run is Blake Bortles. As long as he can get out of his own way, they will go pretty far, I would imagine.
I feel like the Bills. I heard McCoy's hurt, right? So. You basically don't even need Blake Bortles. You can just run the ball every time, and you'll probably put up enough points to win.
I mean, the Bills have been they've survived off of, from what I remember of the Bills, they've survived off of an astonishingly high amount of turnovers and winning the turnover battle at a drastically higher rate than most other teams do. And I think that's kind of won them a couple more games than they should have won and necessarily were ready to win. Because if you remember at the start of the year, they traded away Sammy Watkins. There was talk about trading away McCoy. They traded away Darby to the Eagles. Then mid-season, they traded away Darius to the Jags. So, I mean, they traded away all their good players.
They were in blow-up mode, yeah.
Exactly, and they tried to bench Tyrod Taylor for Nathan Peterman. He throws 5 interceptions, and they got Taylor back in. So they've been trying
to
everybody off.
They got bullied by the fans into putting Tyrod Taylor back in, basically.
Even in other cases, I feel like bullied them over that.
I mean, I don't know if you can say the fans bullied them back into it when he threw 5 interceptions.
True, that's true. There was an outcry. That's my point.
There is a contingent of Redskins fans who are desperate for Tyrod Taylor to replace Kirk Cousins if Cousins leaves. I just don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be desperate for Tyrod Taylor. I like Tyrod Taylor, but yeah, that is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, let's not go there. The point here is we spend enough time on that game. The point is this is a mismatch. It's not going to be close. Buffalo, I'm very happy you guys got in the playoffs, but it's going to be a short run. So eat your wings now because it's going to be over soon. To me. It's just the truth. You got to spit the truth here on this show. To me, the most intriguing matchup of the weekend is the Atlanta versus the Rams. I think these are the two teams that are maybe as closely matched in terms of capabilities.
Rams won't do it.
Yeah, of any of these teams, I think Kansas City and Tennessee is going to be another massacre most likely. I think this Rams-Atlanta game is the one that's going to be close. Mark. Rams in Atlanta.
I'm going Rams all the way. I like the Falcons, but I like them more with Kyle Shanahan. I like them a hell of a lot more with Kyle Shanahan than I do with Steve Sarkisian.
Sure.
He has not been particularly good he's gotten better down the stretch and doing the obvious things of involving Julio Jones. But over the course of the season, he's not been particularly good. Whereas, I think we all here love Sean McVay and everything he's done with the Rams. I can't see past the Rams in the NFC. If I'm totally honest.
Yeah, well,
that's fair.
Sean McVay has a supermodel quality girlfriend. So hat tip to Sean for that.
Wow, he found an attractive woman out in Los Angeles, Steve.
When he's a rich young guy in Los Angeles, it's amazing.
Right. It's amazing if you're rich and good-looking in L.A., you can find a hot girlfriend. I am blown away.
You don't say.
Carolina and New Orleans. To me, this matchup, it sounds great. I'm not sure it's going to be great. It's kind of, the ghetto version of the Carolina Panthers with the way Cam Newton hasn't been that good this year. New Orleans is clicking on all cylinders. I don't think this is going to be as close as people might think. Mark, Carolina, New Orleans?
Yeah, I'd take the Saints because I think their offense is probably second in the NFC behind the Rams. It might even be better than the Rams' offense, but defensively, they're still, while they're vastly improved from last year, they still got kinks here and there where they can be attacked. And Cam Newton, as you say, he's not been quite as good as he has been in years gone by, but he still flashes. He's been quite up and down this year. And if you get a good Cam Newton and maybe a bad turnout from the Saints defense, then that could be somewhat close. But I think Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram take over that game and win it for the Saints.
And I can just tell you, we'll get our preview published Thursday for those of you out there listening. But I can just tell you by my system here, the New Orleans Saints offense graded out by far and away the best out of the NFC if you follow what I did. So, New Orleans has got a lot going for it, I think.
There you go. We got one more then. We should wrap up, right? Do we do?
Yeah.
We briefly said
the other one.
Titans, Chiefs. I think everyone knows the Chiefs are going to win that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily that certain. I certainly think so. I think you always go with the experienced hand in the postseason anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put up a slight defense to the Titans in that they are a very, very talented roster. They have a terrible head coach, a terrible offensive scheme, and they keep going to DeMarco Murray over Derrick Henry for God knows what reason. And
well, you just mentioned they have a terrible head coach. That's the reason.
Yeah, okay, there's your reason. And it's so frustrating because that offense could be very, very good with the right head coach or at least the right offensive coordinator and play caller. And that team looks drastically different, and they would give the Chiefs a very, very tough game. But with
it's kind of a shoulda, coulda, woulda thing, because as is now. I think this offense is the least productive offense of any team in the playoffs. Based on what they've done throughout the season, there's no doubt that this team, this is the one offense the Bills and the Tennessee Titans offense are the two that don't really belong in the playoffs, but Tennessee is worse. So, yeah, I think
the frustrating thing of that is the Titans have almost as much talent as anyone else on offense. They just don't use it at all properly.
They have a god-awful coach.
Exactly. So, yeah, the Chiefs should blow them out of the water just purely from a coaching standpoint.
Nice.
All right.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks. There's the wild card weekend predictions, courtesy of the Hogs Time. More importantly, for Mark Bullock, who actually knows what he's talking about, as opposed to us,
who are just winging it.
We're just winging it. So we are like perfectly at an hour, guys. What do you want to do to close this thing off? By the way, you can follow Mark at Mark Bullock NFL on Twitter. Maybe, Mark, you can tell us what you got going on for the offseason, what people can expect from you.
Well, we'll see exactly what comes up. I did have a plan of I've been charting the Redskins offense most of the year. I've got the last 2 games to finish charting, but I thought I would do a post breaking down maybe the sort of top 15 or 20 passing concepts and show how they work and what their design is, how they work against a certain coverage, or if you've got a different coverage where you might go to that certain receivers and what have you, and situationally when they like to use them, like 3rd and 10 or 2nd and 8 or something like that. All the different situations and that kind of thing. So I thought that might be somewhat interesting in the off season. So we'll see if that comes to fruition or not.
Yeah, and please let me know.
Very interesting.
I've been
let me know
following that, and I love
posted.
it. I love when you were asking fans to just send in plays they love. That was a lot of fun to just watch everybody's drawings of plays come in.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get any responses when I asked for favorite play action plays the next day, but for that one day when I was popular, that was a lot of fun getting a lot of responses.
Mark, I read all your
popular
stuff.
that one day. That's
One
awesome.
day. Yeah, it happens.
I didn't see the play
One
action
day, yeah.
one. Maybe you just didn't do it at the right
Nor
time.
did anybody else. Yeah,
I
that
read it
one
all
day.
and then shamelessly steal it on air. That's fine. All right, cool. Well, we'll let folks get back to their lives now. Thanks so much to Mark for being with us today. Super interesting. Obviously, we got a long off season ahead of us, so we will see you all next time right here on the Hogs Time.